Ladies and gentlemen, family and friends, scholars and dignitaries, welcome to another episode. Welcome to my world.
Hello, friends. So, what would you say if I said I have proof that the government is lying to us? Well, some people might say, what? Never. Others, however, might say, well, why should the government start telling the truth now? And they wouldn't be far from wrong. In this case, everyone knows that America is experiencing a phenomena called hyperinflation. There is inflation, which is a gradual rising of prices on consumer goods and services over time, and that translates into a higher cost of living for the average person and a much higher cost of living for people in the lower socio-economic strata and for those on a fixed income. And of course, there are a number of reasons for this. Hyperinflation, however, is an entirely different creature. Hyperinflation is rapid, excessive, and out of control price increases in an economy. And while inflation is a measure of the pace of rising prices for goods and services, in general, it is usually moderate and manageable, whereas hyperinflation is rapidly rising inflation and can typically be even greater than 50% per month. So, then how is the government lying to us? After all, we all know that we're in a period of inflation, and the government itself just announced that inflation is at a 40-year high. A 40-year high. Well, first, the government is hiding the true cost, the true rise of inflation. They are presenting a serious underestimation of the true rate of inflation. For instance, they just announced, as of this writing, that inflation is at a level of 8.5%. But we all know that is just wrong. You see, the government cherry picks the items from the Consumer Price Index to report on, to include in their estimate of inflation. And believe me, inflation is far greater than 8.5%. Just take a look at this. The inflation for food, for gasoline, for rent, and for college, both public and private colleges. Here are just some prices, and note that these are the consumer goods and services that have dramatic impact upon the average person, and that impact is on the majority of us because the vast majority of citizens are in a category where we need to exercise fiscal prudence and constraint. So, for a recent month, we have a rise in inflation for meat, eggs, milk, fruit, and energy, such as utilities, electricity, and fuel oil, each of which exceeds the 8.5% inflation rate that the government says that we're experiencing. And when you add in even the larger goods and services, you will see that it isn't just inflation, but hyperinflation we're experiencing. For instance, gas went from $2.68 a gallon nationally to over $4.50, or an increase of 70%. Lumber is up 72%. Metals by 75%, and air travel alone has increased 40% just since the beginning of this year. Even pizza went up 60%. And medical care and health insurance have been rising at unsustainable rates, and new home prices are off the charts altogether. Right here, just take a look at the price increase for both new homes as well as rent increases. Unbelievable. And most families cannot even think of pursuing the American dream of a middle-class family being able to afford their own home. And perhaps the worst is the cost of college. College has increased as high as 324% over these past 10 years and has increased in both public and private colleges. It's getting to the point where you can't even afford to take your family to a movie or out for ice cream because even small ice cream cones are $5.50 each. So, again, while the government is acknowledging inflation, they have altered the categories that define their estimate of inflation and are using statistics in a way that doesn't paint a true picture of the scope of inflation we're facing. And now, with the current increase of the interest rates by the Federal Reserve, what we're yet to face with even higher inflation is going to be unbearable. So yes, there are major discrepancies between what the government is reporting and reality. And second, government is refusing to deal with a factor that is not just bad, but crippling. Yes, inflation is bad, but hyperinflation cripples families and, in fact, has brought down entire countries, more than just a few countries. In a nutshell, inflation is a killer. It's an economic killer, especially if you're on a fixed income or lower socioeconomic bracket. In long term, instead of earning just a little more money every year in terms of a cost of living adjustment or salary increases, inflation robs you of that financial advancement and leaves you at the mercy of cutting back on goods and services, even to the point that people may need to decide to either get medicine or food when they can't afford both. And for any savings or retirement you do have saved up, inflation causes a devaluation of that money, again, leaving you poorer over the years instead of in a better position as we age and retire. In essence, we are treading water financially. So, what started all this inflation? Actually, it was the politicians who abandoned a careful, well thought out strategy of fiscal conservatism. It all started with politicians raising the minimum wage by 100% to $15 an hour. By forcing a rise in the minimum wage to include small businesses, you effectively either force them to immediately raise prices for their goods and services, or to lay off workers, or even to close their doors entirely. And many did exactly that. And as the majority of businesses are family owned and under 10 employees, this hits them the hardest. One owner of a small town pizzeria said that their labor costs would increase $250,000 per year with the new minimum wage of $15 per hour. And of course, he raised his prices accordingly. And then our state legislature decided $15 per hour wasn't high enough, so they raised it another dollar an hour. And so as a result, many small businesses have now shuttered their doors, and many restaurants, food stores, retail stores, and a host of other businesses are gone forever. Inflation is a killer to the economy. Of course, secondly, the government flooded the country with freshly printed money, trillions of dollars of new money, and that has an inflating effect on the economy as well. They flooded the country with COVID stimulus money and pandemic-related aid, and this too resulted in higher prices. And this year, the Democrats passed a $2 trillion social and climate spending bill, and then passed a $1 trillion infrastructure bill, which luckily was pared down from even higher numbers. And this influx of cash drives both inflation, but perhaps more importantly, hyperinflation. Now, to be honest, yes, there are a few other things that also contributed. Yes, businesses raised prices to make up for the shortfalls during the pandemic. And yes, other corporations did practice price gouging to increase their profit lines, even as people fell deeper into debt. And yes, we did have a shutdown of companies and a supply line shortage, and this increased prices as well. So many would say that this is the perfect storm that occurred to cause hyperinflation. But what I'm saying is that it was political interference in the system that really was the root cause to begin with. By doubling the minimum wage, and government will not admit it, and in fact seems to be compounding the problem even as we speak. Meanwhile, to control it, the government seems to be adopting a higher interest rate policy. And this is one that, again, punishes consumers and average families and will soon lead back into a recession and stagflation. And that's something else the government won't talk about. So, is the government telling us the truth? Are the politicians accepting responsibility for this crisis? Do the people even know the real causes and consequences? Well, you decide. Hey, be safe, be well, and may God bless.